I never thought my life would spiral into something so forbidden. Until that night. The moment I stepped into my son's room, everything changed. His eyes locked onto mine, filled with something I couldn't comprehend. Or maybe I just didn't want to. My heart pounded as he took a step closer, his voice trembling yet firm. "Mom, we can't pretend anymore." And in that moment, I knew we had crossed a line we could never erase. I was never the kind of woman who believed life could take such unexpected turns. I had always been a devoted wife, a caring mother, someone who followed the rules. My husband, David, and I had been together for nearly 2 decades, bound by a love that once felt unbreakable. But love, as I learned, doesn't always fade in obvious ways. It erodes in silence, slipping away unnoticed until one day, you wake up and realize you're just 2 strangers sharing a house. David had always been a hardworking man, often away on business trips, leaving me alone with our only son, Ethan. I convinced myself that the loneliness was just part of marriage, that the growing distance between us was normal. We barely talked anymore. When we did, our conversations were robotic, about bills, groceries, schedules. There was no warmth, no spark. It had been years since I felt truly seen. Ethan, on the other hand, had grown into a man right before my eyes. He was no longer the little boy who clung to my side. He was strong, confident, with an undeniable presence that filled every room he walked into. And somewhere along the way, things between us started to change. At first, it was subtle. Lingering glances. A touch that lasted a second too long. A closeness that felt too intimate for a mother and son. I ignored it, brushed it off as my imagination. But deep inside, a dangerous curiosity was stirring, one that I couldn't bring myself to acknowledge. One evening, while David was away, I found myself sitting across from Ethan at the dinner table. He had just come back from the gym, his t-shirt clinging to his body, his hair damp with sweat. He looked at me, not as a son looks at his mother, but as a man looks at a woman. Something in my chest tightened. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "You've been working out a lot lately," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Ethan smirked. "Yeah, gotta stay in shape." His gaze lingered. I felt heat rise to my cheeks. I excused myself and hurried to my room, shutting the door behind me. My heart was pounding. Something was happening, something I didn't want to name. And that was the moment I realized I was standing on the edge of something dangerous. The days that followed were filled with an unshakable tension, an invisible weight pressing down on me every time Ethan was near. I told myself it was just in my head, that I was overthinking things. But deep down I knew better. Ethan had started acting differently. Subtle at first, longer stares, closer proximity, an unfamiliar intensity in his presence. The way he spoke to me had changed, too. It was softer, more deliberate, as if he was testing the boundaries of something unspoken between us. One afternoon, I was folding laundry in the living room when he walked in, fresh from the shower. A towel draped around his waist, water droplets still glistening on his skin. I quickly averted my eyes, focusing on the pile of clothes in my lap, but I could feel his gaze on me. "Mom," he said, his voice unusually deep. I looked up hesitantly. "Yes." He sat down next to me, too close. His knee brushed against mine. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his expression unreadable. I forced a small laugh, shaking my head. "Don't be ridiculous, Ethan. Why would I avoid my own son?" His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I don't know. You tell me." The air felt thick between us. My heart pounded in my chest as I forced myself to look away, grabbing a towel from the pile and folding it with shaky hands. "It's nothing," I said quickly. "You're imagining things." He didn't reply, but I could still feel his eyes on me, studying, waiting. That night, I found myself unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's face, his gaze burning into mine, his presence lingering in the air. I turned over in bed, my body restless with something I refused to name. Then I heard it, footsteps outside my bedroom door. Slow, hesitant. I held my breath. The door didn't open, but the sound of his footsteps lingered before retreating down the hall. I exhaled sharply, gripping the sheets as if they could steady the storm raging inside me. The next morning, things only escalated. I was in the kitchen, pouring myself a cup of coffee, when Ethan came up behind me. I hadn't heard him enter. "Morning," he said, his voice low and near my ear. I jumped slightly, nearly spilling my coffee. "Ethan, you scared me." He chuckled, stepping back slightly, but the closeness still made my skin prickle. "Didn't mean to," he said, his tone unreadable. I turned to face him, trying to act normal. But the way he looked at me, it wasn't normal. It wasn't the way a son should look at his mother. I need to go out for a bit, I blurted, stepping past him. Some errands to run. He grabbed my wrist gently before I could leave. Are you running away from me? I swallowed hard. Don't be ridiculous. His fingers lingered before he let go. Okay, he said, but there was something knowing in his voice. As I walked out of the house, I realized my hands were shaking. I was losing control. And worst of all, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to stop it. I tried to ignore it. I really did. For days, I forced myself to act normal, to pretend like everything was fine. I busied myself with chores, avoided prolonged conversations, and kept my distance as much as possible. But it didn't matter. The tension wasn't going away. If anything, it was growing, thick, suffocating, undeniable. Ethan didn't help. He didn't push, didn't force anything, but he didn't step back either. If I moved away, he followed. If I avoided his gaze, he waited until I had no choice but to look at him. If I left a room, he found a reason to enter it. And worst of all, I could feel something shifting inside me. One evening, I was sitting on the couch, pretending to watch TV. David was away again, another business trip keeping him occupied while I sat in this house drowning in confusion. Ethan walked in, fresh from his evening workout, a towel slung around his neck. He was wearing a sleeveless shirt, his arms flexing slightly as he ran a hand through his damp hair. He looked at me, then sat down on the couch, right next to me. Too close. I stiffened. Ethan, you're tense again, he said, cutting me off. I exhaled slowly, trying to regain control. I'm fine. He smirked. Liar. I turned to face him, ready to scold him, but the moment my eyes met his, I faltered. He was looking at me differently. Not with mischief, not with teasing, but with something deeper, heavier. Something that made my breath hitch. I don't know what you mean, I whispered. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping lower. Yes, you do. I should have moved away. I should have ended the conversation right there. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there frozen, heart pounding as he reached out and tucked a loose strand of my hair behind my ear. His fingers barely brushed against my skin, but it sent a shiver through me. Mom, he murmured, voice thick with something I refused to name. My pulse was racing. Ethan, this is wrong, he finished for me. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Because the truth was, I didn't know what was right or wrong anymore. All I knew was that I felt more alive in that moment than I had in years. I avoided him after that. For 3 days, I kept my distance, barely speaking, making excuses to leave the house whenever I could. But it didn't change anything. If anything, it only made things worse. Because the more I ran, the more I realized I didn't want to run. One night, I was in my bedroom, standing in front of the mirror, brushing my hair when I heard a soft knock. I turned, my heart already hammering. Ethan, I called hesitantly. There was silence then. Yeah, it's me. I hesitated, then walked to the door, opening it just slightly. He was standing there, his expression unreadable, but there was something behind his eyes, something raw, desperate. I need to talk to you, he said. I swallowed. Ethan, I don't think. Please, he whispered. I hesitated, then stepped aside, letting him in. He closed the door behind him, his movements slow, controlled. I can't do this anymore, he admitted. I can't pretend like I don't see what's happening between us. I took a shaky breath. Ethan, we can't. Why? He challenged. I turned away, pressing a hand to my forehead. Because it's not right. Because I'm your. He stepped closer. I felt his warmth behind me. Then why don't you stop me? He murmured. I squeezed my eyes shut, my entire body trembling. You need to go, I said weakly. Silence stretched between us. Then, slowly, he reached out, his fingers barely grazing my shoulder. A simple touch. Innocent. But it didn't feel innocent. It felt like a point of no return. Ethan, I breathed, my voice barely audible. He didn't move away. Neither did I. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't going to stop. Because I didn't want it to. The air in the room was thick, suffocating, charged with an energy neither of us could ignore anymore. Ethan stood so close that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, his breath steady yet heavy. My heart pounded so hard I was afraid he could hear it. I should have pushed him away. I should have said something, anything, to stop this before it went too far. But instead I stood there frozen, trapped between fear and something far more dangerous, desire. His fingers, hesitant yet deliberate, brushed against my arm, trailing down slowly until his hand hovered just above mine. My breath hitched. The moment stretched between us, fragile yet unbreakable, as if we were standing on the edge of something inevitable. Mom! His voice was low, filled with something raw and pleading. I squeezed my eyes shut. Ethan, we. Before I could finish, the sound of a door slamming downstairs shattered the moment like glass. David was home. Panic surged through me like ice water. I stumbled backward, my entire body jolting as reality crashed down around me. Ethan's expression changed instantly. From longing to alertness, his jaw tightening as he took a step away from me. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. My breath came in shallow gasps. "You need to go," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. He turned, moving swiftly toward his own room, just as the bedroom door swung open. David stood in the doorway, his brows furrowed in mild confusion. "Hey," he said, setting his suitcase down. "You okay? You look pale." I forced a smile, hoping he couldn't hear the hammering in my chest. "Yeah, just tired." His gaze lingered on me for a moment before he shrugged. "All right. Long trip. I need a shower." He walked past me, heading straight for the bathroom, completely unaware of the suffocating tension that had been in this room only moments before. I exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the dresser for support. My legs felt weak, my mind a mess of thoughts I couldn't untangle. That was too close. Too damn close. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. David was fast asleep beside me, his rhythmic breathing the only sound in the room. But my mind was elsewhere. Ethan. The way he had looked at me. The way I had almost let it happen. The way a part of me, despite everything, still wanted it to happen. I turned over, squeezing my eyes shut, willing the thoughts away. This had to stop. I had to stop. But fate had other plans. The next evening, David announced he had to leave again. Another emergency at work, another trip that would take him away for the weekend. I nodded numbly, feigning understanding, though inside, my emotions were a tangled mess of relief and dread. Ethan didn't say much during dinner, but his eyes never left mine. He knew. He knew we'd been close to crossing a line neither of us could come back from. And now, with David gone, nothing was standing in our way. That night, I tried to lock myself in my room, tried to shut out the thoughts clawing at my sanity. But it didn't work. Because at exactly midnight, there was a knock at my door. Soft. Hesitant. But unmistakable. My throat went dry. I should have ignored it. I should have stayed in bed and pretended to be asleep. But instead, I got up. Slowly, I walked to the door, my fingers trembling as I reached for the handle. I opened it. Ethan stood there, his expression unreadable, his posture tense. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I can't do this anymore." My pulse pounded in my ears. "Ethan, I know," he interrupted. "I know it's wrong. I know we shouldn't. But I can't pretend I don't feel it. And I know you feel it too." I swallowed hard. "This isn't right. Then why haven't you stopped me?" I had no answer. He took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. I backed up instinctively, and suddenly I was inside my room, and he was standing in the doorway, the space between us disappearing. "This has to stop," I whispered, but my voice lacked conviction. Ethan reached up, brushing a knuckle gently against my cheek. I shuddered at the touch. "Then stop me," he murmured. My breath hitched. My hands trembled at my sides. My mind screamed at me to push him away, to end this before it was too late. But I didn't move. Not when he leaned in. Not when his forehead rested against mine. Not when his fingers brushed against my wrist, his touch setting my skin on fire. I stood there, caught in the moment, in the gravity of something too powerful to fight anymore. But just as his lips were about to graze mine, a loud bang shattered the silence. We both froze. The front door. David was back. Panic rushed through me so fast I felt dizzy. Ethan's eyes widened in realization, and without another word, he turned and slipped out of the room just as footsteps sounded in the hallway. I barely had time to compose myself before the bedroom door swung open. David stepped inside, looking exhausted. "Sorry," he said, rubbing his temples. "Flight got cancelled. Had to come back home." I forced a shaky smile. "Oh, that's fine." He walked over to the bed, sitting down with a tired sigh. "You okay?" "Yeah, I lied. Just tired." As he lay back and closed his eyes, I sat on the edge of the bed, my body still trembling, my thoughts racing. That was too close. Too damn close. And yet, I wasn't sure if I was relieved or disappointed. The next morning, everything felt different. The air in the house was heavier, charged with unspoken words and lingering glances. I could still feel the warmth of Ethan's breath from the night before, the weight of his presence just inches from mine. And yet, I couldn't allow myself to think about it. Not with David sitting across from me at the breakfast table, sipping his coffee as if nothing had changed. Except everything had. Ethan barely touched his food. He kept his head down, shoulders tense, fingers tapping lightly against the table. I avoided looking at him, afraid David would notice something in my eyes, guilt, shame, or worse, longing. "Flight's rescheduled for tonight," David finally said, setting his mug down. My stomach clenched. Tonight. He was leaving again. Ethan's head snapped up slightly, but he quickly masked his reaction. "That was fast," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Yeah, well, they need me there. I'll be gone for at least a week." "A week." I swallowed hard, nodding as if it didn't matter. As if my heart wasn't already racing with the terrifying knowledge that after tonight, Ethan and I would be alone. Again. That evening, I busied myself with small tasks, cleaning, folding laundry, anything to keep my mind occupied. But it was useless. Every thought, every breath was consumed by Ethan. David left around 9 p.m., giving me a quick kiss on the cheek before heading to the airport. His touch felt foreign, distant. I watched from the doorway as his car disappeared down the street, the sound of the engine fading into the night. And then silence. I turned around slowly. Ethan was standing at the foot of the stairs, watching me. Neither of us spoke. I should have said something to break the tension, to set a boundary before it was too late. But words failed me. Instead, I turned away, heading toward my bedroom. I barely made it inside before I heard his footsteps behind me. "Mom," he called softly. I gripped the edge of my dresser, closing my eyes. "Ethan, don't. You don't mean that." I let out a shaky breath. "We can't keep doing this." "Then why does it feel like we already have?" I turned to face him, my heart hammering. "Because we've let it go too far." He took a slow step toward me. "And yet, you're still standing here. Still letting me get closer." I didn't move. Didn't stop him when he reached out, his fingers grazing the back of my hand. Didn't stop him when he tilted his head, searching my eyes for hesitation, for resistance. But then, a sound from outside shattered the moment. A car pulling into the driveway. "David?" My heart nearly stopped. I shoved Ethan back, panic seizing my body as I rushed to the window. It wasn't David. It was a neighbor, parking their car across the street. Ethan let out a sharp exhale behind me, rubbing his jaw. "Jesus, Mom." I turned to him, my body still trembling. "This isn't a game, Ethan. What if that had been your father?" He stepped closer again, his expression unreadable. "Would it have changed anything?" I swallowed. "Yes. Really." His eyes locked onto mine. "Because every time we're alone, you don't push me away. You don't stop me. You don't want to." I had no response. Because he was right. And that terrified me more than anything else. The next few days were unbearable. I avoided him as much as possible, retreating to my room, leaving the house whenever I could. But no matter what I did, I couldn't escape my own mind. I replayed every moment, every look, every near miss. The way his voice sounded when he called my name, the way his touch sent shivers down my spine. I was losing myself, and I knew I had to put an end to it. That night, I found him in the living room watching TV. He looked up as I entered, sensing something was different. "We need to talk," I said. He muted the TV, leaning back. "Okay." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "This has to stop." His jaw tensed. "Why?" "You know why." He scoffed. "I know why you think it should. But tell me, Mom, does it really feel wrong to you?" I hesitated. "That's not the point." "It's exactly the point," he said, his voice firm. "You keep telling yourself this is wrong, but you don't feel that way when we're alone. You feel it just as much as I do." Tears stung my eyes. "Ethan, we can't." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded, almost to himself, and stood up. "Fine," he said. "If that's what you want." "It is." He walked past me, his movements slow, deliberate. But just as he reached the stairs, he turned back one last time. "I hope you can live with it," he murmured. Then he was gone. I stood there, my entire body aching with the weight of what I had done. I had ended it. I had done the right thing. So why did it feel like I had just lost the most important thing in my life? Days turned into weeks, but the tension never truly faded. Ethan and I barely spoke. When we did, it was short, distant, like strangers forcing polite conversation. He avoided me, staying out late, coming home only when he knew I'd be asleep. It was as if he had erased me from his world, and in some cruel way, I knew I had done the same to him. David never suspected a thing. He came home from his business trips, kissed me on the cheek, and talked about work while I nodded along, pretending everything was fine. But I wasn't fine. I was drowning in the weight of everything I had let happen. Everything I had stopped before it was too late. Or was it already too late? Because the truth was I had crossed a line. Maybe not physically, but emotionally. I had gone too far. I had felt something I shouldn't have felt. And that alone was enough to break me. One evening, I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, when Ethan finally spoke to me. "Are you happy?" His voice was quiet, but it sliced through me like a knife. I turned to face him, my hands still damp, my breath catching in my throat. "What?" "With him." He gestured vaguely, not needing to say David's name. "Are you happy?" I opened my mouth to answer, to lie, but the words wouldn't come. Ethan smirked bitterly. "That's what I thought." I swallowed, steadying myself. "Happiness isn't always about being with the person you want," he finished for me. I closed my eyes for a moment, exhaling slowly. "Ethan, I made a choice. The right choice." He studied me, his expression unreadable. "For who?" I had no answer. He nodded slightly, as if he had expected my silence. Then he turned to leave. I should have stopped him. Should have said something, anything, to make it right. But instead, I let him walk away. And just like that, I lost him forever. Years passed. Ethan moved out, started a life of his own. He never visited, never called. David assumed it was just the natural distance that came with growing up, but I knew better. I had broken something between us that could never be repaired. Sometimes, late at night, I found myself staring at my reflection, wondering who I had become. A good wife? A faithful woman? Or just a coward, too afraid to choose the person who had truly seen me? I would never have the answer. And maybe I didn't deserve one. What would you have done in my place? Would you have followed your heart or chosen the path that society deems right? Let me know in the comments below. I want to hear your thoughts. And if you love stories that push the boundaries of morality and desire, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Trust me, you won't believe what's coming next.